at what you see. And I will try to more often give you a warning when, when they're about to come up. I would also mention, actually in this sort of caveat piece, that I'm going to use language perhaps differently. I'm going to switch now to mostly calling circumcision genital cutting, because I think that's a more neutral term. It's a more accurate or descriptive term. I think circumcision embeds euphemistically embeds our assumption that it's a fine thing. And the term uncircumcised I'm going to replace with the term intact, because likewise the term uncircumcised gives the sense that circumcision is the norm, and that those who are not circumcised are simply not yet circumcised. And to illustrate that, it would be kind of weird if we called women who had breasts unmastectomized, right? That would be uncomfortable. And I think likewise, I hope to sensitize us to the discomfort of calling uncircumcised uncircumcised. So, the next few slides will have some less comfortable things to see. And again, you're welcome to turn away if you want. So this is the section on the child. The procedure for the child, we'll run through what the procedure looks like. That's probably the most graphic section, along with the complications. And what I want you to think about is, it's oftentimes talked about from the parent's perspective. Parents have a right to choose. I want you to question that discourse and think about, what's the child's point of view? Who owns the child's body? What rights do they have? Why are we doing it to boys and not girls? What's that say about our view of gender? And so on. So, this slide shows 3 different representations of people in the genital cutting process. The top left is a young girl being circumcised in a culturally, in her cultural scenario. The top right is a young boy being circumcised in his cultural scenario. And the bottom right is a young infant boy in a hospital in the U.S. And what I want you to do is look at their faces. Just look at their faces, because I'm asking you to think about their experience. And to me, it looks like they're having a very similar experience. And yet, in our culture, I see us as being kind of imperialist. We're very ready to point the finger and say, oh, these terrible things these people do in these other countries where they practice female genital cutting. We're silent about the male genital cutting that occurs to children under the same conditions of hygiene and the same death rates in those countries. And we promote doing it to boys in this country. So, how do we do a circumcision? The next bits are going to be the most graphic. This is a circumcision restraint. They strap the baby down to it, and then they proceed with the procedure, which I'm going to show you a short video of. This is going to include sound, if I've hooked it up correctly. And again, you're welcome to not look at it. I find this uncomfortable. Okay, so I want to encourage you to take a deep breath if you've been having trouble breathing, like I have during that. And some things I think to notice are the sort of calm detachment of the physician's voice. So the physician is not at all distressed by this. And the way the baby's crying. I hear the babies crying as the way I hear babies cry when they're in extreme duress. Not, I'm hungry. So, beyond the pain of the procedure itself and the pain of the many days it takes to heal, there are a number of complications that a circumcision procedure puts a child at risk for. You can sort of divide them into 2 categories. Surgical complications, which go from the more minor, everyone has a scar who's been circumcised. A lot of men don't actually know that the ring around their penis is the circumcision scar, or they learn it when they hear my talk. But that always happens. But a number of other complications can be problematic that don't occur all the time, like penile adhesions. When the healing process goes awry and 2 parts of the penis that weren't supposed to be connected link together. And then these panels show in the top left A, that's called a fistula. So it's like a doctor-induced hypospadias. The black line going down is a probe that's entering the meatus, the opening of the urethra, and exiting out the additional hole that the physician has caused. And B is a nearly amputated head of the penis. C, so much skin of the penis was removed that the child's corpus cavernosa and head of the penis are lodged down inside the scrotum. And in D, the penis was accidentally amputated entirely. There are also a number of postoperative complications, ranging from difficulty breastfeeding, which is important because breastfeeding is developing the ability to breastfeed is very important for children. Bleeding, which is another sort of minimizing term. You see that on consent forms, and you're like, oh, bleeding. Well, it turns out an infant has 12 ounces of blood. So bleeding a couple ounces may actually cause that child to die or need a blood transfusion. Increase in pain response, infection, which is also very serious for a newborn. Myotitis, which is an irritation of the opening, and that also can be problematic because if it gets bad enough, the child won't be able to pee, and that'll cause you to need catheterization. Necrosis, and even permanent loss of the penis or death. I talked with a pediatric urologist. Those are the people who get the complications to deal with. And he said in a 2-year period, he had over 275 kids he had to treat, almost half of whom required surgery. So they were subjected to an additional surgery in order to attempt to correct whatever had happened. Okay, so that's most of the graphic stuff. Except for in the next few slides, we'll see some pictures of the actual anatomy of adults. So you're also welcome to turn your head aside at that. How many people have seen a penis that was intact? Either your own or a friend's, Well, go see if you can find, if you haven't yet, see if you can find someone who's willing to show you. So I've talked with hundreds of men, both men who've been circumcised and men who have not been circumcised. And I hear a lot of men who were circumcised feel upset about that. They're aware that something, or they've come to be aware that something was taken away from them, and that their body was subjected to something without their choice. I've also heard parents talk about their regret from the procedure. So what is the foreskin? The foreskin is this sort of socially constructed thing. It's really just a part of the penis, but since we cut it off, now we need to give it a separate name. In fact, a lot of potential complications lists that you get on your informed consent form say that one of the risks is that you might injure the penis. So we've actually constructed a reality or a view of reality in which cutting off part of the penis is not injuring it. It's only if you then cut the part that you had intended to leave that it's an injury. So I want to show you what the foreskin is. I want to spend some time on that. The foreskin in an adult male is the part that would have been removed is about 12 to 15 square inches. It's the size of a 3x5 index card. It is the most erogenous part of a human male. It contains 10 to 20,000 fine-touch nerve endings, and it also makes the penis shaft skin motile. So it's the difference when you're having intercourse or some kind of sexual interaction. It's the difference between this kind of interaction and something like, if you can imagine a part of your body where the skin moves around nicely. My cheeks are floppy, so I can do that. And that's actually a significant thing because there's another kind of nerve called a stretch receptor that gets stimulated during that motion, and it's the male's contribution to mechanical lubrication during intercourse. Either male-male or male-female. The foreskin can be broken down in a couple specialized areas. The frenulum is this sort of, my hand isn't really long enough, but it's this fanning out region here, and then there's the ridge band below it. That's where most of the nerves land. And the dartos muscle is a cutaneous muscle that allows the foreskin to respond to cold or fear by surrounding the penis and pulling it in towards the body. In 2007, the first research ever was done to attempt to assess where the penis is sensitive. And they took a group of males who were intact and a group of males who were circumcised. And what you see on this colored graph here, the most sensitive regions are that sort of maroon color, and the second most sensitive regions are the purplish color. If we compare that to a circumcised penis, what you see is we've removed most of the most sensitive areas and left just this region around the scar, and the remainder of the frenulum is really where most men who are sensitive. And so you can compare them this way. But you don't have to believe me. If you can find a friend or two, maybe one who's circumcised and one who's not, and you can, or maybe yourself, you can look and see where the sensitivity actually lies. And for most men, it is in this region of the frenulum or the scar remnant. So just to get you a real picture, what John here has done, he's a photographer, he's taken a person with a foreskin and drawn these lines so that you can see how much tissue it is as it retracts. And the other difference I want you to note is that